My name is Rachel Rothschild, and I'm an assistant professor of law here at Michigan. So I would say the best advice that I received is to be a good community citizen when you're in law school. So by that I mean, if you have a classmate who maybe lost their notes or they're struggling with the reading, and you slide your notes over to them during a cold call that they're struggling with, I think that's just a wonderful way to be supportive of one another, or sharing outlines, or just being there for each other during law school. I know I could not have gotten through law school with the success that I had and the friendships that I made if I hadn't sort of been mindful about wanting to reach out and just get to know my classmates and be supportive of them. And I hope that my friendships will last long after now I've been in law school. So I would absolutely say just to be a good community citizen with each other, and it'll make a huge difference. So I took a class my freshman fall in college on climate change. And it was designed to be an interdisciplinary class about the science of climate change and also the legal and political implications of how we're supposed to hopefully address the problem. And as soon as I took the class, I thought, wow, this is going to be one of the most important problems that my generation is going to face going forward. And I really wanted to be a part, at least in some small way, of trying to help address climate change and other environmental pollution problems. So after that class, I think one of the things that stayed with me was the sense that we'd already done so much research to try to understand the problem. We had the scientific knowledge, even back then, this is many years ago now, to realize this was a serious threat and to try to take action. And yet we weren't, and there's still so much that we need to do. So my scholarship is interested in thinking about how do we move from scientific research and understanding an environmental pollution problem to putting in place appropriate regulatory solutions or other types of ways to address environmental pollution problems. I am interested in studying environmental law, history, and policy in order to think about how we can improve the use of environmental knowledge in our decision making. So this involves trying to understand how we use environmental knowledge to understand the risk of pollution, how the courts and the process of judicial review affects the way that we can protect the environment and public health. And just more broadly, in terms of my approach, using history and the way we've tried to address environmental challenges in the past to think about what we can learn from them to do better in the future. So I'll be teaching environmental law and policy, unsurprisingly, perhaps, and I'm so excited about this class because it's a general survey of all of the federal environmental statutes that are used to try to control pollution. So the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Toxic Substance Control Act, which is one of the areas that I focus on in my work in particular. So my book, Poisonous Skies, looks at the acid rain problem in order to try to understand both the challenges and the successes from that story for approaching climate change going forward. And I was particularly interested in studying the ways in which we studied the problem of acid rain within the scientific community, and then how that knowledge was translated into legal solutions, either through regulation or through international diplomatic treaties. So something people may not realize in terms of toxic chemical pollution is that it's one of the most underregulated areas of environmental health. The Environmental Protection Agency has never successfully put a ban in place for any chemical that's already on the market. And asbestos has been the poster child for this failure of the EPA to properly regulate toxic chemicals. And after a long period of time, Congress amended the Toxic Substances Control Act, which is the main law that regulates chemicals like asbestos. And they did that in 2016. But unfortunately, during the Trump administration, we saw some of the same problems that had beset EPA for decades continue to frustrate action on regulating toxic chemicals. And so my paper was an attempt to try to understand, well, what's really at the heart of our inability to properly regulate these toxic chemical exposures, and how can we use this analysis to try to help EPA do a better job justifying their regulations in the future. It's really worrisome. There are currently tens of thousands of chemicals that are currently in use that have never even been tested for safety in terms of public health or potential harm to the environment. And there's just not a lot of progress that's been made even in the last few years since the Toxic Substances Control Act was amended to try to regulate these harmful chemicals. And it's especially concerning because there are certain vulnerable populations that are especially at risk of toxic chemical harms when they're exposed. So these include pregnant women, children, communities that may be disproportionately exposed to toxic chemicals like minorities, poor communities, workers. And so I think it's something that should take up more of our focus, both within the Environmental Legal Academy and in the broader NGO movement. So I've been really interested in a number of efforts to try to address climate change at the state level, both through litigation against fossil fuel companies for their part in causing the problem, and through passing legislation that could put in place something like a Climate Superfund Act to try to help with adaptation and mitigation efforts for the environmental changes that we know are already baked in due to rising greenhouse gas emissions. And in both of those efforts, the courts are going to play an important role in deciding how much, for example, fossil fuel companies should be held responsible financially for trying to help communities adapt to climate change, and to whether states are going to be free to take action and act perhaps in a more progressive way than the federal government. So my work in this area is trying to think through some of the legal challenges that could be raised and how to best successfully bring these efforts at the state level. I would say that actually having a background in history and training in history is what helps me stay hopeful about the future. It's been useful for me to have this longer perspective, I think, on what's happening today, in part because, one, it reminds me that while things might seem very dark at the moment, over time, I think it's safe to say we have made substantial progress in improving our environment and protecting public health. And I think it also helps me to remember that I'm just one small part of this larger movement that has tried to make progress on environmental protection over time. And so if I can just be one person who's helping in this longer chain, then that gives me a lot of hope for the future.